Thanks everybody for joining today. It was lovely to start with a bit of culture there in the session. So I just want to do a little bit of background. So the Cultural Education Partnership, as it's formally known, has been about 2 years in the running now. And there are 3 working groups, and one of the working groups is focused on local heritage and culture. So we had a meeting at the launch event last autumn 19, which was really lively, but what was really obvious as well was around the people that weren't in the room and the mapping we wanted to do and reaching out and learning more about all of the rich diversity in our borough. So at Arts Depot, we've been doing quite a lot of that over the last year. We're doing quite a lot of research. We've learned some really interesting things and met some really interesting people. I mean, something that we learned recently is that the largest growing population in the borough is Romanians. There's been 4,000 Romanians come to Barnet in each of the last 2 years. So it's really interesting for us. And we've reached out, and I think one of our guests here, Olympia, is actually representing that community. So we're learning, we're talking to people, we're finding out things. This session today is an open discussion. We've got a few provocations and questions. We're interested in just learning about migratory journeys here and how we celebrate and how we engage and what does that mean for schools and the cultural education offer in schools. The Education Partnership really does exist to try and enrich the cultural education for pupils at the moment. We all know that's been something that's been struggling a lot this year. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Kumiko. Kumiko is a brilliant artist, a local person, artistic director of 2 incredible theatre companies that both do great work in terms of bringing cultural learning to people, and that's both in amazing theatre and also in education stuff. So over to you, Kumiko.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, good. Thank you, Tim. So thank you very much for inviting me to come along and speak with you and hear from you as well. So just to give you a little bit of my background, I trained as an actor originally. My heritage is actually part Japanese and part Jewish. So actually when I moved to North Finchley, so I live quite close, I was told that's just the right place to be, as there has been, you know, historically there's been a big Jewish community in Barnet, but also a Japanese community that came in the 90s, and there's still remnants of that. There's a lot of them actually in Ealing as well. But so I started off as an actor, and then I was a founder member of a theatre company called Yellow Earth. We've actually been going for 25 years, and we just renamed ourselves New Earth this year, which felt very appropriate, celebrating 25 years, but also looking forward to the future and bringing, I hope, some hope to us all in these difficult times. So we're looking at new beginnings, but I'm now the artistic director. I've been the artistic director for about 8 years, and we work with British East and Southeast Asian artists and communities, and very much providing opportunities for artists who are often very marginalised within our sector, within theatre. You don't really see our communities aren't high profile. There's, you know, the visibility is poor. We've struggled with many things, I think, amongst the communities, and there are many. You know, we work with people whose heritages come from east of India, as it were, so it's quite a big spread. Obviously there's quite a sizable Chinese community in Barnet. I believe it's the biggest actually. Out of all the boroughs, the biggest concentration is actually in Barnet, which is quite interesting. And the work we do, I actually trained as a teacher before I became an actor, I should say that. So I have an interest in education. So I've definitely always been interested in how, you know, theatre and drama can be used within educational settings. I'm also co-artistic director of a company called 1,000 Cranes, and we bring Japanese stories and art forms to UK audiences, and focusing on children. So it's very much for children and family work. whereas New Earth is a much bigger and broader situation. But you can check us out on the website and see this kind of work we do. So it's really interesting because of my background in education, and I started working as an actor with Yellow Earth, but then as we grew, I started looking at outreach and participation, how to engage with communities. I actually became a cultural ambassador, funnily enough, for Arts Depot, just as it was moving into its new building in North Finchley. So I actually discovered the area and subsequently moved up to Barnet around the time that Arts Depot opened for the first time in Finchley. And we were very much looking at engaging with Japanese and Chinese communities in the borough at that time. And we did something called asobi, which was a play day, which we brought lots of different Japanese artists and did a whole big day that I curated, and a family participation day. And part of that was actually developing a piece of theatre, because I looked around, there was nothing for young people that were sort of focused on Japanese stories or anything we could do, you know, theatre wise for that day. So I teamed up with someone called Vicky Ireland, who's a children's theatre practitioner, and we created a piece called Tales from Old Japan, and that was the beginning of 1,000 Cranes. So that's my connection with Barnet as well, and that did very well. And we've been, you know, presenting that piece, which is a one-person storytelling piece with 3 different stories, over the past, well, that was 2005. So it's quite a number of years, but it still really works for an audience. And we've done that in schools, in festivals, all over the world, everywhere. So and we've done subsequent pieces as well. So that's been really wonderful. So I think with Yellow Earth, so I was running the outreach and participation work, and we started doing workshops in schools. And that was interesting because I suppose the workshop started around our theatre productions. So they were like offshoots, ways of engaging children and young people with some of the themes within our shows. But I became interested in looking at how we can bring the children's creativity to cultural forms. So we would introduce something like shadow puppetry, Chinese shadow puppetry, or paper cutting, and we would use that in a creative way with the kids, that they would create their own stories after having maybe listened to one that we've told. So it was combining stories and art forms together, and they became quite a successful sort of run of workshops. In 2008 it was the Beijing Olympics. There was quite a bit of money around, so we were employed to develop a range of workshops, which we still offer today, although I think it's quite interesting coming back to it now. Now I've become artistic director and very focused on the company, and we do a lot of different work. We work in museums as well as in theatre, as well as in schools, but we're looking now more at language learning, using drama for language learning, as opposed to bringing off the PEG workshops into schools. And yes, I think, I'm not sure, I do have some questions around it myself, around, I think some of the issues I feel is that particularly for our communities, the British East and Southeast Asian communities, there's not normally a large number in a school. There might be one individual child in that year group. There might be a few in that year group. If you're lucky, you know, there's not big concentrations. People are quite spread out across the borough as well. And it's something about, you know, children for quite a number of years want to fit in. That's what they want to do. They don't want to be different. They don't want to be singled out. And I think there's something about bringing in, you know, maybe a story from China, Chinese story, Chinese folktale, and then also how does that relate to that child? How can it be a positive experience as opposed to an exposing experience, or, you know, that every child thinks, oh, you know, that's what. Or if you bring, you know, Chinese New Year is a time when we often come in to schools, you know, or in the past we've been asked to come in and it just feels it's just that slot, you know, and it becomes all about these traditions that some of these kids may have not even heard of, you know, and not as, you know, doesn't relate to them. So I think we really have to be sensitive around that and see, you know, how we can bring, I think, you know, sharing culture is really important, but it's how we do it and what's the best way for children. So it's some of those things I don't have answers, but I'd be really interested to hear what people's thoughts are around that. Anyway, I could go on forever. Tim, do you want me to carry on? Good.
That's brilliant. It was interesting. We had a conversation earlier today about this, like avoiding the othering and kind of like not, and making the cultural exchange and the cultural dialogue something that is built into a sort of a curriculum and a journey, rather than just the occasional celebratory moments. And it was really interesting for me because I've just organised a Diwali party for Saturday for my peers, for my non-Indian kind of peers. But it is a great way as an opening for people. But it shouldn't just be. But once you sort of get to learn something about a culture, then it's really interesting to go a bit deeper and to actually look at exchange as well. And that's where perhaps bringing on to Anne will be really interesting, because Anne's going to be talking about international exchange and funding opportunities that can help schools in particular create relationships with schools in other parts of the world and do exchange activities. So Anne, if you're ready, I'll pass on to you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm nodding away furiously there, because all the things that you're saying are the kinds of things we're trying to explore with schools, and that idea around critical thinking, and not just about tokenism, but maybe as I talk, and I'll try not to talk for too long, it will become clear how we're trying to explore that. I'm going to try and share my screen. Before I do that, I'll just say a bit about me. I've been based in Barnet in the education department, working with Neil Marlowe in the school improvement team for many years. And I've got lots of different hats, as we all do, but I work for the British Council as a schools ambassador, and I work for their Connecting Classrooms programme as well, and I'm an assessor for various funding programmes for global linking and intercultural exchange, and I work with Global Learning London, which I'll talk about a bit more in a bit, who are also involved in this kind of work. So I've been doing it for quite a long time, and it's still fantastic, I think, which is why I'm still here, really. I'm going to share my screen and just talk to you a bit more about what we do. And I am very mindful of not, doing too much in terms of PowerPoint. So I'm going to talk through the slides, and please jump in or, interrupt or ask questions if you may have any. Connect, as it says there, Network for Global Learning and Education. We bring schools together to work with partners in other parts of the world to share, compare, contrast, explore, celebrate cultural experiences, identity, diversity, life in different parts of the world, and all that means. We are obviously talking a lot about heritage, but then also talking about ideas around migration and those kind of things, which we've also been doing for many years. And I'll talk to you a bit more about opportunities specifically around migration. There's lots of great opportunities for schools to get involved. And I just thought I'd start by showing some images there. So the one on the top left, that's from a Barnet school that's done some really great work with their partner, comparing and contrasting where their community comes from, plotting that, and then thinking about what kind of migratory journeys our families have made. And I think that idea about being sensitive, that this kind of work can be challenging and can be difficult, but not to shy away from that. And I think it's about how to do it, as you said, in a sort of sensitive way, because there may be stories, there may be things that are difficult and sensitive and perhaps controversial. So you do need to go in with that kind of attitude. The second one is just, as many of your schools are, really celebrating the culture and identity and, as I said, diversity within our schools. And then the third one along the top on the right is a school that's been involved in cultural heritage and then brought their families in, obviously, to share and talk about that so it can really be celebrated. And I think that last picture there says it all. That's what we're trying to do, is connect our pupils and our schools up together, particularly at the moment in times where people feel isolated and on their own. This kind of work can really help pupils feel connected to others and share what's been a very difficult experience, but also find similarities a shared experience in that. I've told you what Connect is, but this is the kind of things that our schools are doing. So through the Connecting Classrooms Through Global Learning programme, accessing funding, developing links, and that programme particularly links schools across Africa, Asia, the Middle East and North Africa, working together on curriculum-based projects. So it's not about, you know, the gifted and talented kids in the after-school club or lunchtime club. It's about it being a whole school approach to this work, and this work really being embedded in the identity and ethos and visions and values for the school. And it's a great way to bring the community in, as I said, to sort of say we are open-minded, we are broadening our horizons, we want to share the experiences of everyone in our community. And I think particularly, as we all know, as things are perhaps, avenues are being closed with Brexit and things like that, we're really trying to say, look, there's even more reason why we need to be outward-facing and think about engaging and celebrating our community and working closely with our community. Also linked into the Sustainable Development Goals, which is all about kind of quality education, diversity, peace and justice, all those kind of things. And there's 17 of them, and we do lots of training around that, but they're very much linked into, I think, these kind of themes about you know, shared experience and celebrating everybody within our school and the wider community. And there can be opportunities there also for working with cultural and arts-based organisations, which is in a way how I first came to sort of be working with the Arts Depot, or talking to Arts Depot and being involved in this, because there's lots of links of what we do with schools and what the partnership is trying to do. And then why get involved? Well, we've done lots of training around, you know, the anti-racist curriculum can help with the Ofsted expectation of sort of personal development, cultural capital of pupils, developing those SMSC skills down there. So really creating the sort of whole pupil rather than just thinking about, you know, course subjects, etc., etc. And then again, as I keep going on about that idea about, you know, the school being part of the whole community, and bringing that in and engaging with them too. So there's lots of opportunities for schools to get involved, lots of funding, lots of free support, and lots of CPD training around all of these kind of issues. And that's what we try and share with our schools. What are they doing? All sorts of things. You can see the photos there. These are just some of the things that our schools are doing. And we've done things like a project around cultures and customs in our schools, sharing traditional music from around the world, culture in a box, which is something that lots of schools are involved with and sharing with their partners overseas. We were involved in a Creative Cities and Urban Stages project, working with schools across the world. That was an online community. A joint digital sound wall, again doing that across, that was with schools here and schools with China. And we do have a big area linked with schools in China. So we did at one point have lots of schools in Barnet linked with China and creating amazing performances together and joint stories and joint pieces of artwork. So it's a really fantastic stuff. And as I said, it's done within the curriculum, so it's not something that's an add-on. And I feel like I'm talking. I just want to flag this up to you. There is some fantastic training that's been done through the Global Learning London team, and that's linked into Connecting Classrooms, the programme that I mentioned before, funded by the British Council. And that's really around training around the sensitive issues about migration, but also just picking out bits there from that kind of description, critical thinking about it set within a conflict resolution perspective, and thinking about shared history and shared futures. Pupil Power and the Black curriculum have been very much involved in creating that training programme and those resources, and it then links and again is a springboard perhaps for accessing funding to develop projects and then do some of the things that I've just spoken about. The British Council has just announced a new call for creative commissions for the COP26 next year. something I haven't spoken to anyone there about yet, but it's just been announced. There's a deadline of 13th of December. I don't know if that might be of interest. And then I'm just going to leave you with some more images, give you an idea and the flavour of the kind of things our schools are doing. And please do contact me if you'd like to find out more, discuss, or you've got any questions or any comments now. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. That was really interesting. I mean, if anyone does want to raise any particular questions now, then do go ahead. Before the next bit of the kind of session is going to be an open facilitated discussion, but just shout right now if you do have any questions. Kumiko?
I was just curious, Anne.
Yeah.
How many schools are involved, you know, in this kind of work, and how is it all schools, or is it very much to do with the you know, the head is really interested in this kind of work, and so it happens?
It takes passion. It takes somebody with an interest normally, but it also needs the support of senior leadership, of course, otherwise it's not going to work. It needs to be seen as a whole school activity, i.e. it's not just sort of sits within the year 3 and it's not, you know, Sarah's baby and that's just something that she does and we don't know anything about it. The key is that it should be linked into what schools are doing already, because we know how difficult it is for schools to do. And in terms of numbers, we've got about 60 schools. We don't just work with Barnet, so we work across North London and various schools in other parts sort of near and around London, but nationally there are lots and lots of schools involved, and I think it's trying to tie it in and help schools see that it links into so much of what they do, which is what I tried to show with one of those slides. You know, it's absolutely key to what schools are having to do now anyway, and I think the inclusive curriculum again is a real tool and a vehicle to develop global learning, but global learning can then also help you develop a more inclusive curriculum that represents your school and your community. That's really interesting.
I have a question, Anne. So I'm the trustee of a charity that runs a small school in Mohali near Chandigarh in northern India. So the school, obviously it's closed right now, but it traditionally serves the children from a slum area. And it's they have a very, very different profile. It's partially informal. Some of the children have work responsibilities, often as cleaners or fruit sellers, and we have to accept that because of the lives they live, we can't be as formal as obviously some schools would be. That said, we have now had our first. So we've been running this charity for about 15 years. We've had our first person graduate to get a university placement. And we do, when they get to secondary age, we do send some of about 7 or 8 a year, go on to the state school, and we find individual sponsors for those. I just wondered about, when you're partnering schools in other countries with schools in the UK, do there need to be some parity and I mean, our safeguarding is obviously very different for the school in India as to what it would be over here. I'm just wondering, because for years we've thought about how could we partner Bright Sparks with a school in the UK, and it's only in recent years they've actually had Wi-Fi, and there's only 4 laptops for 100 kids. So it's it was working out how you do something that, you know, is sympathetic to that.
I can't say that it's not challenging. It doesn't take work. But in terms of who would you link with, I think it goes back to what I just said about having a passion. You know, if the school's keen, and if there are teachers here and there's a school here who would be interested to link with them, then there are ways of doing it, you know, whether it be virtually, whether you do old-fashioned things or things like WhatsApp, or whether it's through one of the sort of platforms such as e-twinning, and there are various platforms that schools can link through, or very kind of just a one-to-one link initially through the teachers, with the teachers talking about the UK, talking about India, doing some research in each other's schools, or thinking about for them what the UK may be like, what the community might be like here, and what people's lives might be like, and then doing some sort of similar exercise here. You know, it's all about What do we think about our partners? Then doing some work with them. Were we right? Were we wrong? What have we learned? What has been challenged? And that direct link is absolutely key and motivating. You know, we had a big Zoom with schools in the UK and Nepal for all of us, adults alike. It was, you know, wow, we're all linking up. We're having this terrible experience. We're not at school and everyone's online learning and home learning, but we're linking up together. We can see each other. And whether it be done through Zoom and something technical like that, or just sending a letter, I'm not in the business of, you know, my name's Johnny and I like football. It's really about how can you have a meaningful link that's linked into something that develops into a real understanding and intercultural learning between the two schools. But it can be done, and I'd be really glad to help you if that's something that you wanted to do, and perhaps try and find a partner here who would be able to do some work with them.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. We are hoping that the school opens again in December. So
yeah.
Right, we've got a few questions just to open up a discussion now to the wider group. So the first one is about what cultural heritage priorities should we be exploring? Really interested to see what anyone in the wider group thinks about that. I mean, obviously this year has seen Black Lives Matter become really important a campaign, or at least get a lot more exposure than it had done in recent years. We've got different communities that are growing, and yeah, I'm just interested in what our participants think.
Tim, could you just repeat that again, and I'll write it in the chat as well?
Yeah, sorry. What cultural heritage priorities should we be exploring or focusing on? I can't actually see any of our participants, so I don't know if anyone's got their hand up. Can you, Louisa?
I can, and we haven't got any hands up at the moment. So. Okay,
fine. Well, I'm going to put it out there. So let's start with Black Lives Matters. I mean, it's been, it's had so much profile this year, and obviously with the changes that are happening in America, it's really welcome and timely. But also it can be challenging for organisations. You know, we've had to reconsider some of the ways we operate this year and create an anti-racism statement. But also it does then make us think about activities. What do we do and how do we respond?
I'm just going to join in something that Kumiko mentioned earlier, and it came up in a couple of previous sessions that we've had this week, about where it's brilliant to have moments which are specific, and but how to broaden so it's not just those moments that are specific. And I'm thinking in particular Black History Month, or Kumiko, when you've mentioned that Chinese New Year, or you go in for specific events, which is great because it's a moment. And I think it came up in the RAF session earlier about how they've got a great workshop which is called Pilots of the Caribbean, focusing on some fantastic stories which they wanted to share from their collections, but they've noticed that obviously that those sessions are very popular, particularly during Black History Month, and what actions there can be done to make sure that it's something which is consistently important and a priority throughout the year, rather than just those moments. And I don't have any great answers for that. It's just something that I've noticed as a theme has come up, unsurprisingly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a difficult. I mean, we even find that in programming our theatre productions, you know, for the marketing department, it's if there's anything that's, you know, Chinese themed in terms of a play or something that could work in that New Year slot in January, February, March, which is not the best time for theatre. You know, that's where they try and, yeah, sort of steer us towards, and we're quite sort of, I mean, we want the autumn slot, which is the best slot in terms of early autumn before Christmas, but that's a better time of year. So that's always a struggle we have, saying, you know, not just for one time of the year. But again, I understand, you know, suddenly schools maybe have some budget and they think, yes, we can do something around Chinese New Year, we should be doing something. And that's when we get called up to bring in workshops and so forth. I'm interested. I'm sorry, I was interested in when you talked about the anti-racist curriculum route, Anne, and what, because I know, I mean, within the theatre sector, there's been obviously a lot of work as well around anti-racist practice and what we can do around the structural racism and how we can change it. We've been working with touring theatre companies to create an anti-racist rider for touring companies. So that's really interesting. So it'd be great to have a conversation with you. Sorry, this is going slightly off into theatre, but in terms of, you know, how that's all managed and not managed, but, you know, how people can be feel welcome, and some of the aspects that, you know, come with touring as a non, you know, non-Caucasian community of actors and so forth. Yeah, I was just interested in this sort of anti-racist curriculum, what that actually means. What does that involve when you say that? Yeah.
Is that for me? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned it earlier about, you know, the inclusive anti-racist curriculum.
Yeah.
So I wondered.
So in terms of this global work, we're trying to show that by linking and being seen as a school that has broadened horizons, and that you want to explore ideas around identity, diversity, you're linking with schools in other parts of the world where perhaps there's, so therefore your curriculum and the work you do is more relevant to everybody in your school. That idea about
Right.
that you may be linking with countries where you can see that there's sort of real success and achievement, and I suppose looking in terms of role models and those kind of things. So if, you know, a school that might be linking with a school in Ghana, for example, might, you know, you might be exploring a curriculum that's completely different, and where achievement and that kind of thing is celebrated much more. I suppose it's just that idea about we are open and we're a school that's looking for representation beyond the curriculum that we're delivering at the moment. I think also it links in very much to that idea about sensitive issues, this whole critical thinking, that this work is all around active citizenship and thinking deeply about things that might be controversial and difficult, as I said. And the Global Learning London does some great training on the anti-racist curriculum, where it really challenges participants to think about their own views, being brave to discuss those kind of issues, and how you can then go on to discuss those issues with your pupils and as a school community. So there are some schools that are absolutely breaking everything down right from the beginning and looking at that idea about privilege and different perspectives and all those kind of things. And we're trying to say that if you're involved in this work, you're kind of automatically got that viewpoint and thinking in that way, just because you're sharing different perspectives. Sorry, I rambled on a bit there.
No.
Yeah, another question for you, Anne. Are there any sort of cultural trends that you see, particularly in Barnet, and also any areas which are kind of omitted, any areas which we need to do a bit more work to try and bring in some content or artists that are exploring specific things?
Well, I think I was sort of alluding to that bit in my slides, that schools are encouraged to work with outside organisations. So I would be very keen to tell schools who may not know about Arts Depot and about the work that you're doing, that there is the possibility to bring that real kind of cultural aspect, I suppose, in terms of the arts in, and there could be funding for that. So for them to work with you, and I suppose, you know, so we could try and link some of the schools who are linked with partners in other parts of the world to have a go at some kind of arts-based project that could then be mirrored in their partner school. Or is that the kind of thing that you mean?
Yeah, it's just really interesting. We're obviously working on this community engagement strategy, and we've looked at the different populations in the borough and the sort of proportionality of those different groups, and we look at the kind of material that we put on stage, and we're interested in programming diversity. We've been fortunate to secure some rescue funding from the Arts Council. So going forward, we're actually feeling quite ambitious about our creative programme and how it might diversify. Looking at some research and some background to try and set some principles for how we do that.
I mean, it would be really great to have some kind of, we've got lots of schools, I think I may have said, but working with Nepal, but it would be really great to try and involve Arts Depot more in sort of having a real sort of active role perhaps in that creative process. For example, if a school is creating some kind of joint performance with their partner, or doing some work to help the schools here think about how they could bring art, you know, sort of art in a more sort of concrete way into their linking and into their work around climate change, for example, or around, as I said, you know, diversity, or who are we, or culture in a box, so that they could work with the Arts Depot to create some kind of piece that could then have an added kind of dimension by involving or inserting something that from Nepal, if you like. So, yeah.
I did a lovely cultural heritage schools project as a child myself, where, so I went to school just near Cambridge, and lots of the schools we made these kind of little tiles, and we were learning about Roman culture and history. And there were mosaics, and then all the schools came together to see the mosaic as one large mosaic, and then see some performances, and it was really beautiful, and it was really engaging. And we'd learnt some songs as well, and so it was a great exchange. I wonder what other examples people have of really fun cultural heritage projects that they've been involved in.
I was going to just ask that, similarly, Kumiko, you've mentioned previously some of your work going into schools. I don't know if you've got any examples, but I was interested in where you said where some young people want to fit in, and so they don't necessarily want to look specifically at their cultural heritage if it makes them other or defines them as separate. So I'd love to hear a bit more about your work and where you found that has worked, and where it might have been challenging if it hasn't, or if it has focused perhaps quite specifically on a cultural group.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in the past, we don't do this so much anymore, but in the past we developed these workshops, say for around Beijing Olympics time, that's 2008. So we had a variety of workshops which brought stories, song, you know, and art forms into schools. So we did something around shadow puppetry, which has actually always been a favourite and a very popular one, where we told a story with a very simple screen and some Chinese shadow puppets, although we always said we're not experts, because that, you know, literally the people who are puppeteers, I mean, like with many Asian art forms, it takes, you know, it's a lifetime of learning, and it's really highly skilled, and you use one hand to manipulate one puppet, but just to see how they're made, how they look, a story that we could share, and then they go away and create their own story in their own version using, you know, the same sort of setup in terms of how to make a puppet. That always worked well, and we did shadow play behind the screen. And I suppose, I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, with those schools that we went to, there was barely ever any East Asian kids in the school, or might be one in the class. So it just feelings, you know, sensitive around that child, and whether that was something they wanted to, you know, felt some ownership around, or whether they didn't want to be singled out, or anything, which we wouldn't do. But it was interesting, and I think, you know, the kids really enjoyed it. It was a session, but it's always that very unsatisfying thing of going in, doing a session, and then leaving. You know, you have a great time on the day, and, you know, schools only afford you for last, and it's on a carousel, and it's like completely exhausting, and, you know, and it never felt really that satisfying. Having said that, we have done projects over longer periods of time that have created, you know, plays and pieces of theatre. We did something where we actually worked with 3 different secondary schools, and they worked with different artists, Beijing opera artist, a dancer, and so forth. You know, it's quite sort of classic setup, but and then they created a piece that we then shared at the Barbican in front, you know, before a show, and they loved it. You know, the kids loved it. They said, "Oh, it's the best thing we've ever done." You know, and they were year 7, but it was like they really enjoyed it. They seemed to get a lot out of it. It was very hard work, and I think for the, you know, and I did sort of think, you know, for me, I'm much more, I prefer to meet the children halfway, as opposed to going, right, this is the cultural form, you learn this. You know, for the Beijing opera, it's very set. So she was very strict. She had a whole script, you know, and it was all very proper, and they looked amazing and everything, and they struggled with it, but, you know, in the end it was satisfying. But for me, that's not how I would choose to you know, engage or work with children or young people. And maybe that's, you know, but it's also, you could say it's just as valid for her to, you know, to work in that way. That's her artistry, and that's what she wanted to share in terms of the Beijing opera and the storytelling. And it is interesting to look at how that storytelling, you know, is different from the Western storytelling, and how you could maybe bring the 2 together. And we've done that before. So yeah, I'm much more interested not in the pure form myself, not being a purist, but, you know, but bringing in a creative, you know, element to it, so the children can get an idea and then, you know, use it to their own devices to enrich their own practice or performance, I would say. Yeah. I'm trying to think. We've done so many projects. They've gone in my head. I'm trying to think. We did a great one in Thamesmead with the Vietnamese community, and that was very much about where they were from, you know, their home, and they all did sort of little explorations around what home meant for them, where it was, and that was working very much with the community, which is quite different. You know, obviously engaging with kids or a school who have people from all, you know, different backgrounds, has a different type of you have a different type of engagement, I suppose. But with the Vietnamese community, it was really powerful, and they did some really, really exciting work, and for them it was, yeah, I think that was very meaningful. You know, that felt very meaningful because I could see that they were gaining so much from it. Whereas, and that was over a period of time. I suppose, you know, being able to have that time and have time to develop relationships and, you know, go into more depth is really important. Sorry, that's me waffling on.
I was going to say that it's really interesting to hear, of course, meeting people halfway, but I think across the partnership that we've got, the members that we have in Barnet are such a broad range of expertise and experience, and some of your points, I think, across the speakers make it clear that there's a lot of conversation to be had, and just seeing what is happening in schools. Like Anne said, there's lots of fantastic projects happening, but where we are able to continue to connecting those cultural organisations with schools who may be able to facilitate the conversations or explorations of cultural groups in different ways, where it isn't necessary, it doesn't have to be completely purist or focused. It might be part of a larger conversation or celebration, but it's perhaps a different approach to how we explore some of those themes and topics.
Yeah.
Can I just, I'm always trying to find connections between things, and I'm thinking about the whole sort of taking action agenda, which is linked in, of course, to sort of the whole anti-racist curriculum and the sustainable development goals, and just where we are at the moment. And I suppose thinking also about that funding stream that I spoke about, although that's probably something that's too soon, but thinking about how pupils can make a change and to empower pupils, and how this or the work of the partnership and schools, and then bringing them together to create pieces or whatever it may be around that idea about empowerment and making a change. I don't know, I'm just thinking about that might be a way of connecting things up, or and then also I suppose for the community too, how can we use this work to make a change and give people confidence to make a change? And then I suppose that links it into ideas around, you know, performance and those kind of things that can help with that. So again, I might be going off on a tangent, but
no,
people seem to be leading the agenda at the moment. Sorry, that's just sort of they seem to be wanting to change things.
And I think that you haven't gone off on a tangent at all. So it kind of leads nicely onto something I wanted to share. So I'm a filmmaker. Don't really work with schools, but in 2017, I was involved in a project where it was young. Well, they weren't school age really. They left school. It was between actually 16 and 24 in Lewisham, and I don't know if anyone's heard of the Battle of Lewisham, but in 2017 it was the 40th anniversary of the Battle of Lewisham, where the National Front and a lot of other fascist organisations marched through Lewisham because it's so incredibly diverse, and it was their way of claiming the streets. So we were involved in a project where we trained the young people in filmmaking. They then went off to do interviews about whether people in the area knew anything about the Battle of Lewisham. And the project actually ended up turning completely in a direction none of us predicted. The young people did their research. They went along to the libraries. Part of the project was taking them to libraries to sort of learn how to research, and they did journalism skills as well, had training, and they actually turned around and just ended up being really angry that they knew nothing about the Battle of Lewisham. They knew about the Battle of Hastings, but something that had happened in their parents' lifetime, and something that was so prominent that, you know, it crushed the National Front. And they were just like, this is really important people's history. It's also considered as Black history. Black history, as everyone's now discovering, is actually part of wider history. So we've been commissioned to make a longer film, just so that can be it's all great timing, so that can be fed into the to help to decolonize the curriculum and get that people's history into the schools. Sadly, with COVID, things have kind of put a stop on things, but we've made a short 3-minute film, which I'll put in the chat, so if you want to have a look. But my thing was, I suppose, the way, I suppose if we could focus on local history, people's history, and weave that into the curriculum in various boroughs, that could be a good way of people empowering themselves, actually, to sort of show, well, these are the advantages of having a diverse community. This is what happens when the community come together. Change can happen.
Yeah, I think that's great to hear, Lorna. I think research. I think that research is really important in this, and I think we don't really do enough of it. And I think, something I'm interested in terms of Barnet and culture for youth is around a HLF. Well, I'm not sure quite not sure if it is called HLF anymore, but application in the future once they reopen, which will be around looking at the different sort of stories. I was hoping perhaps more of them might come out today about the groups that have come to Barnet and the journeys, because there are some. We did a project with Niraj Chagh, who's his family were they came from India via Kenya to from Gujarat via Kenya to the UK, but as part of a population of about, well, many tens of thousands of people that took this same route. And it was very much a sort of, it was probably the East India Company or someone that started that journey. But so you saw this, so he would now be many generations down. But we actually secured some funding then, but we did our groundwork. We learned some stuff, we put a call out, we met Niraj. He taught us a load of stuff, and then we got this really interesting content together, and so that resulted in a commission of a performance that was part of the opening of the Commonwealth Games celebrations in Glasgow, and also in a launch of a festival at the South Bank Centre. So it's really interesting, but I think what we've got to just, I think my takeaway from that is, like when we're starting on these next journeys of investment and exploration, and we're looking at engagement, that because we're currently doing a lot of research on the current sort of status of Barnet, but we haven't done a lot of research on its history and on the different groups. And I think we probably need to go and pick various people off. I mean, sadly, COVID hasn't helped us in that, because after that working group meeting we had, the local historical societies were going to host their first ever coming together in several years, since they'd had various challenges in years before about this, and then that has been postponed until next year, I think. But it doesn't mean I can't pick up various conversations with different cultural groups and individuals who can give us some insight into some of the stories and points of interest that we can explore to inform some of the work that we can do.
I was going to say, it was when I mentioned at the beginning about JJ Land, this is North Finchley, but the Japanese, have been, I remember coming up to North Finchley when I was very small, which is quite a long time ago, in the early 70s, and that was the one shop near us. We lived in Watford, but that was the only one Japanese shop, was in North Finchley. And there's always been a community here, and it grew during the 90s when Japan was very strong economically. Lots of business people were posted here, lots of expats, and they all came to North Finchley because of the golf courses. So that's why there was a really big community here. And then also there's a nursery school, the Yorchien, which is connected to the main school, which is actually in Ealing, but the Yorchien is here in North Finchley. And there's a lot of connection. There's a lot of Japanese women. There's a Japanese Residents Association, and currently we are doing a project around recording Japanese women's lives of Japanese women who settled here post 1945, and we're creating a performance exhibition piece. So we're actually melding the idea of an exhibition with performance. So we're sort of deconstructing and dismantling the idea of whose narrative an exhibition brings. Usually it's a particular perspective that we have, traditionally. So we're taking audiences on a journey to really discover the lives of Japanese women in this country. So that's very exciting. So I need to talk to you about that as well, Arts Depot, because it'd be great if you would be involved. But at the moment, we've just been doing it in Shoreditch Town Hall, because there isn't one particular place. I mean, the Japanese community, there is some in Ealing. I don't know how far. Actually, in Hendon, there's also some people who are buried there, Japanese, buried in the 19th century, 20th century. So there is quite a long connection there. Just thought I'd say that. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I had one other example of a project that happened in, it's unrelated, but just also on the same sort of general discussion point, a project that I was involved with, really a partnership years ago. So I worked at Battersea Arts Centre between 2006 and 2012, and we worked a lot with knee-high theatre there, and we also had a partnership with the local Muslim school that was one of the first, I think they called it grant maintained, or one of their sort of state independent school. That originally, actually when we started working with them, they had 300 or 400 students, and they'd hired an old theatre. But it was an independent school entirely at that point. The parents were paying for the teacher's salary, but they wasn't paying a lot, I don't think. So then they really did need that sort of state subsidy to come in. And to get the state subsidy, they had to sort of evolve a bit from the position they were in. And hence we were talking to them saying, look, we'd love to try and work with you. But of course it challenged some of our sort of ways of working. So there was like the boys had to come in first and the girls had to be separate, and they'd come in afterwards. But we also realised we had to be sensitive to the cultural traditions. But the thing so over the year we started off doing visual arts, which is kind of challenging with the Islamic community, because there's elements of visual arts that you can't really do, but there are some that you can. And then and then the really exciting point was working on Knee-High's Rapunzel, where we adapted the show so that the Muslim children could come and watch it. And it meant quite a lot of adaptation because some of the costumes were inappropriate, some of the music was inappropriate. There was a kiss in the show between a girl and a boy, so that had to be taken out. But the great thing was that once that work was done, those children got to come to the theatre, probably most of them for the first time, saw an amazing, incredible production, were totally excited and enlivened. And obviously that was made possible because of the commitment of Battersea Arts Centre and of Knee-High. It didn't make any commercial or financial sense at all because it took quite a lot of work to change it. But the joy that was created and how that would have influenced those people's lives is immeasurable. Funnily enough, last night I found myself writing to a primary school teacher that I discovered on Google recently, who I credit with really changing my life's pattern. So Mrs. Jarrison was my teacher when I was about 8 or 9 and lost contact obviously after the age of about 10. And the other day I was saying to someone how I think this woman transformed my life. You know, she made creative writing the most important subject when we were 8 years old and talked about openness and diversity. And she took us to different religious places. And just in 1 year, all of our brains were blown open. It was just brilliant. And for me, I went on to study creative writing and for that to be a massive part of my personal and professional life. Anyway, the other day, I thought, you know, this woman has done so much for me. I've got to find her and tell her. And I did. I found her on Google. Her name had changed because she was obviously a young woman when I was 9 years old. But via, I think, Facebook and then a professional thing, I worked out when her married name changed. And I got in touch. And anyway, I was able to send her the most wonderful, expressive thing last night, just to say, these are the things you did in that year. The Jabberwocky, for example, she made our school play that year. The parents all thought she was crazy and couldn't understand it. The children were all completely, you know, their minds opened by it. And I suppose I'm giving that example just to say how much even a simple incident or thing can change you in the future. And yeah, it's really important to invest in these cultural experiences for young people because it plays out throughout your life, the opportunities you get when you're younger.
Can I ask a very maybe naive question? But has anybody ever asked the Barnet community and people in Barnet to share their stories, to share? I mean, I know we've said that can be difficult, but shown an interest in that. We had a pupil who was involved in a linking project, and actually we are trying to recruit schools for that, but we're all around identity diversity said I've never been asked questions like that about who am I, you know, how do I see myself, those kind of things. So I'd never been asked that, and said he'd enjoyed that because that's the first time he'd ever thought about it or anyone had shown any interest. And I was wondering whether it would be good just to go out and tell people that you want to hear their stories. And as I said, that might be naive because you may well have done that already.
I was going to jump in to answer that one because I don't think it's naive at all, and obviously I'm very aware we're speaking from an Arts Depot perspective and that there's many partners who have different experience and work with the Barnet community in very different ways to us. So others on the call, please do share in the chat if you don't want to speak in person or give us jump on and tell us. But I think we're trying to shift the way that we work so we get better at asking people. I think it's very easy when you're busy and working to deadlines or working to try and get certain funding to get used to working in different ways, and we're trying to shake that up a bit so that we turn it round to know our community better in order to shape our activity for the community better, rather than having an activity and then trying to find the people to come to it. I'm not sure if I articulated that well. And it might sound really simple, but I think that we also need to consciously keep remembering it so that we keep doing it, because it's very easy to forget when you're the one just getting on with it. So we're doing a couple of projects which I hope we're able to do more of, and we've just done a project which was a bit smaller, which was a dance project, and we worked with choreographers of different ages. So we had a choreographer under the age of 10, and then one in the teenage years, one in their 20s, one in their 30s, one in the 40s, etc. In fact, Tim was actually one of those choreographers. So that was a chance for some self-expression and some professional artists to work with individuals and community members, so that they decided what was on stage, and it was a real mixture of themes. And I think that I can't remember I know that the 10-year-olds dance was very, very different to some of the older age groups, but there were themes about money laundering, themes through to reminiscence of childhood, a huge range. So not quite specifically about their personal stories, but it was their voices being told through the artwork. And we're just about to recruit for a theatre project which similarly works with communities, where it's about our neighbours. So we're looking quite specifically at Finchley, and we'll be working with about 6 community groups, existing community groups, or groups of people. They might be a workplace, or they might be a political party, or a working men's club. And 2 theatre artists will go into whatever their locality or their environment is, and just have conversations with them. So it might be, if it's a gardening group, the 2 theatre practitioners will just go and garden with them. If it's the WI, they might go and take part in the, I don't know, whatever session it is that week, making a cake or hearing a speaker. But that conversation will then be played back through the performance. So verbatim speech, sharing their stories back on stage so they can hear them on stage. So there's just 2 examples of a community project, examples of ways in which we want to work more, so that we are getting better at telling our community's stories. But I think there's a lot more that we can do, and that goes back a bit to what Lorna was talking about by having those conversations and telling our people's history. That's a very simple way of celebrating the diversity and the migratory journeys that we've got in the borough, just by changing whose voice is being heard.
I don't know about anybody else, but when right, oh gosh, I hope I'm not going to mispronounce the name, Kumiko was saying about the golf courses and the one Japanese shop. I mean, that's just so, I just find that really interesting. Do you know what I mean? You know, and it's funny because last Halloween, I was just off to the shop, and I sadly was called the N-word, and I thought, my goodness me, God, you know, this old and I'm still being called that, and it's kind of, I don't think that will stop. The name calling won't stop until everybody is educated as to why and how someone who looks like me is here. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's Stuart Hall that said, I am here because you were there. Do you know what I mean? And it's really important for the way history is taught. It changes so that, you know, people are educated as to, you know, yeah, why are all these people here? Do you know what I mean? And this is by sharing migration stories, if you want to call them that, it's a start, it's a beginning. Because as I said, these young people, they went out and made their own films, but it was just so funny how each of their films seemed to sort of end with, and why don't we know about this? Do you know what I mean? Why don't we know about the Battle of Lewisham? Do you know what I mean? Why did I have to learn about it, you know, like this, when it and we've interviewed all these other people and no one else knows about it. Do you know what I mean? But yeah.
Oh, I totally hear you. I think that's so true. I mean, especially, you know, there's been a lot of COVID racism targeted at East Asian and Southeast Asian communities. You know, it doesn't help when the President of the United States calls it the China virus, etc. And, you know, obviously it started there. So I just know everybody who's had, you know, everybody I know has had some kind of abuse at some point. of varying degrees, and I think, you know, it is really difficult. And I think there's a perception also within the country that, you know, most people who look East Asian are foreigners. They are students, or, you know, they don't live here, they haven't been born here, and so forth. And the Chinese community goes back, you know, centuries. And in fact, they found bones, Roman remains, near the River Thames, and they found Chinese DNA in the bones, which actually means that they were here much earlier than anyone else ever thought. And when you asked about projects, I did think of a fantastic piece we did called The Last Days of Limehouse, which was actually based in, we did it in the old town hall, Limehouse. I don't know if you know the old town hall there, but it was we were exploring the first Chinese community in London, which started at Limehouse around the docks because of the sailors who came over on the, you know, with the East India and the ships there. So that was sort of turn of the century, late 19th century. And they married, they stayed, they couldn't get their passage back, and they ended up meeting local women and they married. So there was a really mixed community there very early on, which was fascinating because there's nothing left there now. So we did a whole audio walk where you had to imagine. There's a couple of sort of, you know, names of streets called Mandarin Street and Ming Street, you know, but otherwise you wouldn't know there'd been any community there, because they obviously moved to Soho in the 60s. So yeah, I think the history and the stories are so important.
And it's important to bring those alive.
Yeah.
Soon, you know, those remnants,
yeah,
you know, may go. So it's good to record them and like, yeah, why is this called Mandarin Street? Did you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
I sometimes wonder if the curriculum might be a bit too restrictive. Well, I feel it is restrictive, and it doesn't allow perhaps for some of the creativity that people have and the stories they have to get out there. I mean, I know I did support a campaign recently to ask the government to increase more focus on the narratives around the Black Lives Matter, and I got an email saying it was going to be discussed in Parliament. I don't know whether that happened. Anyone follow that?
I don't know if that happened, but just from the diversifying the curriculum session that we had earlier this week, it was interesting to hear from teachers and Art Against Knives, who are leading quite a lot of the work in the borough, that things are changing, and I don't know if that's, I think it's happening broader than just Barnet, but I know that schools, it's certainly a priority for schools, and similarly to what we were saying earlier, it's interesting and important that is being led a lot by young people. In particular, the work that Art Against Knives are doing was led by a sort of call to action by young people and a letter that went to East Barnet School, and then as a result a lot of changes were happening in the school in response to young people taking the action. So I think a lot of what this is making me feel is very aware of how important it is for us that we're talking about these stories and histories of people in our borough, but how maybe we should have had this session in particular open up to young people as well. I know we've got other sessions where young people are speaking, but we need to be talking to them about what stories are told and how.
Yeah, so it's all interlinked. It feels like we have, as a society, we've got a pain threshold to get through in the next year or two, and we've got to suffer to get there. Lorna, I'm so sorry to hear that you're suffering. Makes me want to cry, actually. Blatant racism out there on the streets still in this day and age. We've got to work harder and do more so that the next generation don't have to experience that. And we've all got a responsibility towards that. So, but it's an exciting journey, and it's an interesting journey. And I think it's one that is now culturally the norm, that everybody's recognising. We've got to call out racism. We've got to change and evolve. We can't accept or awful practice where we've seen it. We've got to stand up for people on the tubes and in the out on the street where we see things that aren't right. And we've got to celebrate and learn about the stories. It's not just about celebrating heritage and history, it's also about exposing the difficult parts of it so that people are aware of the background that we've come from and that it is no longer acceptable.
Can I just say, one major thing I took away from these young people sort of made their films, but then we had to just sort of make a little film with all their elements, and just, I'm an editor, so I edited the short film together. And there was a young person who interviewed someone called Barbara Gray. Now, Barbara Gray was the deputy mayoress of Lewisham until about 6 months ago. They've got a fantastic format where the mayoress changes every, I think, 6 months. And she was interviewed about her time, growing up in the area. And she shared something really interesting. She sort of said, well, the thing is, when there was a call out to people around the world, part of the Commonwealth at the time, sort of saying, well, look, the mother country's in trouble, come help build it up, there's jobs. A lot of the people that were resident here they were not told that these people were going to come. So in one respect, you can understand that, you sort of, all of a sudden there's these different looking people around the place. But it was perhaps the fault of the government authorities to not share what was going on. And that simple lack of not sort of saying, well, actually, the country needs building up. We've been going, we've started campaigns where we're going to the West Indies to invite people to come. None of that was shared. All of a sudden, these people just arrived. So, you can really understand sometimes, where this animosity came from. And we just need to learn from that.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that was a situation also with when Eastern Europeans came over, lots of at a certain point, and lots of communities, there was no thought about how it could be integrated. They were just told to go to certain cities and towns. And there's a lot that government needs to do, and organisations, and we have to pick up all the pieces.
Yeah,
with people. Yeah,
true.
But it's sorry. Yeah.
Well, we've heard loads of really interesting things today. A really interesting discussion. I'm really grateful for everybody for taking part. Does anybody have any questions or stories they want to share before we call it a day? No, good. Our dinner's all waiting for us, hopefully in the kitchen, hasn't got cold. So yeah, just thank you so much for contributing. My big takeaway, I think, is about doing more research, look into the background, and also to continue the work we're having where we're talking to young people, we're learning about their interests and their stories, also talking to older people and residents, and just really learning about the rich narratives and holding on to that information so that we can use it in the future.
Tim, I was just going to jump in to say, well, thank you firstly to everyone who's spoken. It was really interesting, but we do have obviously more sessions throughout the week, but there is a networking session tomorrow as well, and they're just really open to have conversations and hear what other people are doing, so that we can find more opportunities to overlap or connect and make projects like we've discussed here work.
Okay,
thank you very much for having us.
Yes.
Thank you. It's really
lovely
great
to meet you all. Lovely
Yeah.
to see you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.